My name is Christy, a 32-year-old software developer from Boston. Dad was my hero, the man who taught me everything from coding to courage. When the doctors said he had months to live, his final wish was simple: to see the Grand Canyon before he died. I promised to make it happen until Mom claimed they couldn't afford the flights. I believed her, swallowed my disappointment, and worked harder. Then my aunt accidentally tagged Mom in those Hawaii vacation photos. Best family vacation ever, they celebrated while Dad was dying. Before watching this story unfold, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories that might just hit close to home. I grew up in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in Dorchester, a working-class section of Boston where everybody knew everybody. Our house wasn't fancy. A modest two-story colonial with faded blue shutters and a slightly crooked mailbox that Dad kept promising to fix but never did. It was home, though, filled with memories of baseball catches in the backyard and science projects sprawled across the dining room table. My father, Richard, was the kind of dad other kids envied. A mechanical engineer by trade, he could fix anything with his hands and had an insatiable curiosity about how things worked. Every weekend was a new project: rebuilding car engines, constructing computer setups from spare parts, or teaching me how to code when I was just 10 years old. "Christy, knowledge is the one thing nobody can ever take from you," he'd say, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as we hunched over motherboards together. Those moments shaped me, guided me toward my career in software development, and built the unshakable bond between us. Mom, Margaret, was different. Where Dad was warmth and patience, she was efficiency and expectations. She kept our family running like clockwork, managing the household finances with spreadsheets and planning every holiday down to the minute. My sister Heather, 4 years younger than me, was clearly Mom's favorite, something nobody acknowledged out loud but everyone felt. Then there was Aunt Patricia, Mom's younger sister by 3 years. The two were inseparable, sharing daily phone calls and weekend shopping trips. Where Mom was careful with money, Aunt Patricia was flasher, always talking about investments and business opportunities. She'd never married, had no children, and treated Heather and me like her surrogate kids, though her version of affection came through expensive gifts rather than time spent together. My life took its own path. I met Michael during my junior year at MIT. He was in law school at Harvard, and we connected at a mutual friend's party. After 6 years together, we married in a small ceremony that my father embraced wholeheartedly and my mother tolerated with thin smiles and stiff hugs. Michael became a criminal defense attorney, passionate and driven, while I bounced between startups and consulting jobs, always chasing the next big technological breakthrough. The dynamics were clear. Dad was my champion, Mom favored. Heather and Michael was viewed with cool politeness rather than welcomed as a son-in-law. We maintained our relationships through holiday gatherings and occasional Sunday dinners, an uneasy peace that we all pretended was normal family functioning. Then came the diagnosis. It started with Dad complaining about back pain and losing weight without trying. Mom dismissed it as him working too hard until the jaundice appeared. The doctor's expression told us everything before the words pancreatic cancer even left his mouth. Stage 4, aggressive, 3 to 6 months. I remember Dad sitting in that sterile examination room, still wearing his work boots and flannel shirt, nodding calmly, as if receiving a weather report rather than a death sentence. "Well, I guess we better make the most of the time then," he said, reaching for my hand. Mom stood by the window, her back rigid, staring out at the parking lot. The next weeks were a blur of second opinions, treatment consultations, and painful discussions about palliative care versus aggressive treatment. Dad chose a moderate approach, enough chemo to potentially buy more time without making his remaining months miserable. One evening, as I sat with him during a treatment session, he pulled out a wrinkled piece of paper from his wallet. "My bucket list," he said with a weak smile. "Never thought I'd be facing such a hard deadline on it." The list was short. Most items were already crossed off. Teach his son to drive, see Europe with Mom, build a cabin at the lake. Only one item remained uncircled: see the Grand Canyon. "Always wanted to stand at the edge of something that magnificent," he explained. "Something that took millions of years to create. Puts our little lives in perspective, doesn't it?" I made a silent promise that day. Dad would see his Grand Canyon, feel that perspective before the cancer took him. There was just one problem. My financial situation wasn't great. The startup I'd poured 3 years and all my savings into had collapsed 6 months earlier. I was freelancing while job hunting, making enough to cover my and Michael's apartment and bills, but not enough for medical expenses and a cross-country trip for a sick man who'd need special accommodations. Michael and I discussed our options late one night after Dad had fallen asleep in our guest room, which had gradually transformed into his second home as the treatments intensified. We could put it on credit cards, Michael suggested, his legal notepad filled with calculations, and pay it off for the next 5 years. We're already helping with the medical bills that insurance won't cover, I replied. The truth was uncomfortable but unavoidable. I needed help. Mom had always handled the family finances, and between her full-time administrative job at the hospital and Dad's engineering pension, they should have had decent savings. Aunt Patricia frequently mentioned her successful investments. Between them, the flights and accommodations should be manageable. I decided to bring it up at our next family dinner, hopeful that Dad's final wish would be important enough to rally everyone's support. The family dinner happened on a Thursday evening in late September. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting Boston in shades of amber and crimson. Dad was having a good day. His pain was manageable, and he'd even helped me prepare his famous beef stew, supervising from a kitchen stool as I followed his decades-old recipe. Mom and Aunt Patricia arrived together, bringing a store-bought pie that Mom transferred to one of her dishes when she thought I wasn't looking. Heather came last, rushing in from her job at the marketing agency, her high heels clicking against the hardwood floors. For a while, everything felt normal. Dad told his corny jokes. Heather talked about her latest promotion, and Mom fussed over the table settings. Michael poured wine for everyone except Dad, who clinked his water glass against our wine glasses with good humor. To family, he toasted, his voice raspier than it had been just months ago. After the main course, while Michael served coffee, I cleared my throat and shared my plan. I've been thinking about Dad's bucket list. I began pulling up a presentation on my tablet. Always the software guy, I'd created a simple slideshow with photos of the Grand Canyon, along with a detailed itinerary and budget. His biggest wish is to see the Grand Canyon, and I think we should make it happen next month while he's still feeling strong enough to travel. Dad's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since before the diagnosis. You're serious, son? Absolutely, I confirmed, turning the tablet so everyone could see. I've researched everything. We'd need accessible accommodations, a medical transport service on standby, and we'd have to fly instead of drive to conserve Dad's energy. I've found flights from Boston to Phoenix, then we'd rent a van to drive to the South Rim. 3 days total, manageable for Dad's condition while still giving him plenty of time to experience it. Mom set down her fork with a small clink against the plate. Christy, this seems elaborate. It's his dying wish, Mom, I said quietly. The silence that followed was heavy. Dad reached over and squeezed my hand, his eyes bright with unshed tears. How much are we talking about? Heather asked, already pulling out her phone's calculator app. I walked through the numbers. Flights for 5 people, specialized transport accommodations, meals, and an emergency fund for any medical needs. The total came to just over $15,000. I can contribute $5,000, I explained. It's tight with helping cover some of Dad's treatments, but Michael and I can make it work. I was hoping the rest of the family could help with the remainder, especially the flights, which are the biggest expense. Heather immediately nodded. I can put in $2,000. It'll mean postponing my car down payment, but this is more important. All eyes turned to Mom and Aunt Patricia. They exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Well, Mom began, her voice taking on the practical tone she used when discussing household budgets. This is a lovely thought, Christy, but the timing is just impossible financially. The property taxes just came due, and there was that plumbing emergency last month. I thought Dad's pension covered those expenses, I said. His medical costs are eating into everything, she replied quickly. The co-pays, the supplements he needs, the special foods, it all adds up. We just can't afford the flights right now. Maybe in a few months. We all knew what a few months meant with Dad's prognosis. I turned to Aunt Patricia, who was studying her manicure with intense focus. Aunt Patricia, I know you mentioned that investment that paid off last month. Could you help with part of the flights? She sighed dramatically. Oh, sweetheart, I would if I could, but that money's already allocated. The condo association hit us with a special assessment for new roofing. $8,000 just like that. She snapped her fingers. I'm actually borrowing from your mother to cover part of it. I looked between them. These two women who had always preached family first, who had lectured me about saving and planning, who wore designer watches and drove new cars every 3 years. This is Dad's last wish, I said, my voice catching. He's never asked for anything. He's taken care of all of us his whole life. And we're taking care of him now, Mom said firmly. Sometimes being an adult means making practical decisions instead of emotional ones. Your father understands that. I looked at Dad, who had shrunk into his chair, his earlier excitement evaporated. He patted my hand. It's okay, son, he said softly. The pictures you showed me are beautiful. Maybe we can look at them together on that big computer screen of yours. Almost like being there. The dinner ended awkwardly. Mom and Aunt Patricia left together, murmuring about a bridge game the next day. Heather lingered, helping clean up and whispering, I'll try to talk to Mom before she left. That night, as Michael and I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I'll pick up extra freelance work, I told him. Night shifts, weekends, whatever it takes. Dad is going to see that canyon before he dies. Michael rolled over and kissed my forehead. I know better than to try to talk you out of something once you've decided. Just don't run yourself into the ground, okay? Your dad wouldn't want that either. But I was already making mental lists of clients to contact, platforms to join, and projects to bid on. I'd find a way, even if it meant working 20 hours a day. For 3 weeks, I lived on caffeine and determination. My days blurred together. Wake up at 5, work my regular contract job, until 3, help Dad with dinner and medications until 7. Then back to my home office for freelance projects until midnight or later. Weekends disappeared into marathon coding sessions. I took every job offered, debugging ancient legacy systems, building simple websites for local businesses, even tutoring high school students in programming basics. My body protested with headaches and a persistent cough. Michael left food by my desk that often went untouched. You're going to make yourself sick, he warned, but I waved him off. The Grand Canyon Fund was growing. Slowly, but growing. Dad's condition, meanwhile, was deteriorating faster than the doctors had predicted. The weight dropped from his frame like leaves from autumn trees. His once resonant voice became a whisper, but his eyes still lit up when I showed him my research on the Grand Canyon, the geological formations, the hiking trails we would admire from accessible viewpoints, the way the light changed the colors of the rock throughout the day. Just 3 more weeks, I promised him. I'm almost there with the money. It happened on a Tuesday night, or rather Wednesday morning. It was nearly 3 a.m., and I was fixing a database issue for a client in Australia. My eyes burned from staring at screens all day, and my shoulders felt permanently fused to my ears from tension. Michael had long since gone to bed after leaving a sandwich and glass of water by my keyboard with a note that simply said, "Eat human." My phone pinged with a social media notification. I almost ignored it. Who posts at 3 in the morning? But something made me glance over. It was a tag alert from my aunt's profile. Patricia Hunter has tagged Margaret Wilson in 27 photos. Curious and needing a break, I opened the app. The first image loaded, and I blinked, certain my exhausted brain was hallucinating. There was my mother reclining on a lounge chair beside an infinity pool that overlooked a perfect tropical ocean. A colorful cocktail rested in her hand, complete with tiny umbrella. She wore oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat I'd never seen before. Beside her, Aunt Patricia beamed at the camera, making a peace sign with her fingers. The caption read, "Best family vacation ever. So blessed to experience this paradise with my sister. Sisters forever. Luxury living Hawaii." I scrolled through image after image in stunned disbelief. Mom and Aunt Patricia on a catamaran at sunset. Mom getting a beachside massage. Both of them dressed up for what appeared to be a luau. Mom shopping in a high-end boutique, multiple bags hanging from her arms. The timestamp on the first post was 3 days ago. While I'd been working myself to exhaustion, and Dad had been suffering through another round of treatments, they had been in Hawaii, on vacation, together. My fingers trembled as I clicked on Aunt Patricia's profile and scrolled back further. There were check-in posts from the airport lounge, comments about their business class seats, a photo of their oceanfront suite with the caption, Only the best for the sister trip, worth every penny of the upgrade. Every penny they couldn't spare for Dad's dying wish. A comment from my mother on one of the posts caught my eye. "So glad we finally made this happen. After all the stress with Richard's illness, I needed this escape. Love you, sis." The sandwich Michael had left me turned to ash in my mouth. I pushed back from my desk and walked to the bathroom on wooden legs, barely making it before emptying my stomach. The cold tile felt good against my forehead as I sat there trying to process the betrayal. It wasn't just about the money, though, that was infuriating enough. It was the lie, the calculated decision to hide their plans while looking me in the eye and claiming financial hardship. The conscious choice to prioritize a luxury vacation over a dying man's final wish. And somewhere beneath my shock and rage was a deep, familiar pain, the knowledge that this was just the latest in a pattern that had defined my entire relationship with my mother. I thought back to my 10th birthday when Mom had claimed we couldn't afford the science camp I desperately wanted to attend, only to send Heather to an expensive horseback riding program the following month. The Christmas when Dad had secretly bought me my first computer because Mom had insisted presents needed to be practical that year. The cool response when I announced my engagement to Michael, compared to the elaborate party thrown when Heather got engaged. The subtle digs about my lifestyle choices, the way she introduced Michael as my friend to her bridge club, the constant comparisons to Heather's more traditional life path. I'd spent years making excuses for her, telling myself she just needed time to adjust, that she showed love in different ways. But staring at those vacation photos, something hardened inside me. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about Dad, the man who had accepted me unconditionally, who had championed my dreams, who had walked me down the aisle with tears of joy in his eyes, being denied his dying wish, while his wife of 40 years sipped cocktails in paradise. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt Michael's hands on my shoulders. He knelt beside me on the bathroom floor, concern etched across his sleep-rumpled face. "Christy, what happened? Are you sick?" Wordlessly, I handed him my phone still open to the stream of vacation photos. He scrolled silently, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to cold anger. "When was this posted?" he asked, his attorney voice emerging. Calm, controlled, dangerous. 3 days ago. They're still there now." He helped me up and led me back to my office, pulling up a chair beside me. "Show me everything." Together we pieced together the timeline. The luxury resort bookings made just days after our family dinner. The first-class flights. The spa packages. Based on what we could see, they had spent at least $20,000 on this trip, money that supposedly didn't exist. "There's more," I said, a new thought occurring to me. "Dad has a medical expense fund. Mom controls it. It's where some of the insurance reimbursements and family donations go. What if?" I couldn't finish the sentence, but Michael understood. His jaw tightened as he pulled me into an embrace. "We need to know exactly what we're dealing with before we make any moves," he said. "But Christy, if they've been taking money meant for your father's care..." The implications were too horrible to contemplate. I buried my face against his shoulder and finally allowed myself to fully break down my body, shaking with sobs of rage and heartbreak. "What do I tell Dad?" I whispered when I could speak again. Michael stroked my hair gently. "The truth. As difficult as it is, he deserves to know what's happening with his own money and his own wife." I nodded, exhaustion and emotional overload making my movements sluggish. Michael guided me to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay there watching the ceiling gradually brighten with dawn, my mind cycling through memories, warning signs I should have seen, and the inevitable confrontation to come. At 7 a.m., after a sleepless night, I sent my mother a text that contained just 3 words: "Enjoying Hawaii, Mom." Within minutes, my phone began ringing. I watched her name flash across the screen 6 times before the calls switched to Aunt Patricia, then back to Mom again. I silenced the phone and placed it face down on the kitchen counter as Michael made coffee. "They know they've been caught," he observed, sliding a mug toward me. By mid-morning, the social media posts had been deleted, but it was too late. I'd already taken screenshots of everything. My inbox filled with private messages from Aunt Patricia ranging from explanations. It was a last-minute deal we couldn't pass up to accusations. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is to threats. Your mother is devastated. by your reaction. I ignored them all and drove to my parents' house where Dad was alone. Mom having obviously not returned from her non-existent vacation. He was in his recliner by the living room window, a blanket over his legs. Despite the warm day looking out at the bird feeder, he could no longer maintain himself. "You're early today," he said, brightening at the sight of me. "No work." I took the day off. I sat on the ottoman, facing him, gathering my courage. "Dad, there's something I need to show you." His face fell as I pulled out my phone and slowly walked him through what I'd discovered. With each image, his expression grew more distant. When I showed him my mother's comment about needing an escape from his illness, he closed his eyes briefly. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. He shook his head slowly. I suspected something. The stories weren't adding up. Margaret's been taking extra money from our accounts for months now, said it was for medical expenses and household repairs. He sighed heavily. I didn't question it because, well, what would be the point? I'm not going to be here to worry about retirement savings anymore. His resignation broke my heart. "Dad, this isn't right. That's your money too. There's something else you should know." He continued, his voice taking on a strange, detached quality. "I've had a separate savings account for years, just my name on it. Started it back when you were in college, putting aside a little from each paycheck. Meant it to be a surprise for our 50th anniversary, a world cruise." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Ironic, isn't it? Does Mom know about this account?" "She found the statements about 6 months ago, right after my diagnosis. I gave her access, thought she might need it for expenses after I'm gone." He looked up at me, his eyes suddenly clear and focused. "Christy, there was over $80,000 in that account. Last time I checked, it was down to less than 15,000. The room seemed to tilt sideways. $65,000 in 6 months. Dad, that's not all going to household repairs." "I know." His voice was barely audible. "I've been trying to figure out how to ask her about it." A terrible suspicion formed in my mind. The medical expense fund, the one where friends and family have been donating. Does Mom control that too? Dad nodded slowly. "Joint account, but she handles all the banking now. Says I don't need the stress." I texted Michael this new information, and his response was immediate. "Need to see those bank statements. All of them." Just as I was trying to figure out how to access the financial records, the front door burst open. Mom stood in the entryway, still tanned from her Hawaii sun designer luggage at her feet. Aunt Patricia hovered behind her like a shadow. "Christy James Wilson." My mother began using my full name like I was a misbehaving child. "How dare you ignore my calls and upset your father with your accusations?" "They're not accusations if they're true," I replied, standing to face her. "You lied to all of us. You said you couldn't afford to help with Dad's Grand Canyon trip while you were planning a luxury vacation in Hawaii." "That was different," she sputtered. "Patricia invited me. It was her treat." My aunt stepped forward. "Your mother needed a break. Caregiver fatigue is real, Christy. You of all people should understand stress." "A break," I repeated incredulously. "Dad is dying. He has one wish, just one, and you couldn't postpone your spa treatments to make it happen. You don't understand what it's been like," Mom said, her voice rising. "Day in and day out, the medications, the appointments, the special meals. I needed some time for myself." Dad's quiet voice cut through the tension. "Margaret, where is the money from my anniversary account going?" The color drained from my mother's face. "Richard, you know there have been expenses." $65,000 of expenses in 6 months, I challenged. Plus whatever was in the medical fund that family and friends donated to. Aunt Patricia moved to stand beside my mother, a united front. "Your mother has been under tremendous strain. You have no right to interrogate her like this." "I have every right when it's my father's money being stolen." I shouted, my composure finally breaking. Stolen? Mom looked genuinely offended. "I'm his wife. What's his is mine. Not when it's being used for luxury vacations instead of his medical care or his dying wish." I pulled out my phone again. "Should we call Heather and ask what she thinks about this? Or the cousins who donated to Dad's medical fund? Should we tell them their money went towards spa treatments and shopping sprees?" The mention of Heather seemed to trigger something in my mother. Always so dramatic, Christy. This is why Heather is easier to deal with. She understands family loyalty. Family loyalty? I laughed bitterly. Is that what you call spending Dad's savings while he wastes away alone at home? This attitude is exactly why we've always worried about you, Mom snapped. Ever since you started with your lifestyle choices, always making everything so difficult. There it was, the truth beneath years of cool politeness. My lifestyle choices, her code for my sexuality, my marriage to Michael, my refusal to live by her narrow definition of acceptable. Dad's voice cut through again, stronger this time. Margaret, that's enough. But Mom was on a roll now, decades of thinly veiled disapproval finding an outlet. If you had just settled down with a nice girl like your sister did, maybe you'd understand what real family means. Instead, you and your husband are always judging us. Michael has done nothing but support this family, I said through clenched teeth. He's been here helping care for Dad while you've been collecting seashells on the beach. We deserve that vacation after everything we've put up with. The words exploded from her, and the room fell deadly silent as we all registered what she'd said. Put up with. My father's cancer. His dying. Something she had to put up with. Dad struggled to his feet, waving away my attempt to help him. Though physically diminished, his presence filled the room. Margaret, he said, his voice steady despite its weakness. I'd like to see our bank statements, all of them, today. My mother's face crumpled into an expression I'd never seen before. Fear mixed with the realization that she'd finally crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Richard, you're upset. We all are. Let's talk about this when everyone's calmer. No, Margaret. Now. He turned to me. Christy, would you call Michael, please? I think I need some legal advice about my finances. It was at that moment I knew that whatever happened next would change our family forever. Michael arrived within the hour, bringing his legal notepad and a colleague who specialized in elder law and financial abuse cases. They set up at the dining room table while I helped Dad gather what financial documents he could find in the home office. Mom and Aunt Patricia retreated to the kitchen, whispering urgently and making occasional phone calls. I caught fragments of their conversations, just a misunderstanding blown out of proportion going through a hard time. Dad's hands trembled as he sorted through file folders. I should have paid more attention, he murmured. I just trusted her. 42 years of marriage and I never thought. I squeezed his shoulder gently. This isn't your fault, Dad. We brought the documents to Michael, who reviewed them with professional detachment, though I could see the tension in his jaw. As the picture became clearer, so did the magnitude of the betrayal. Beyond the anniversary savings account, there was evidence of systematic withdrawal from Dad's pension fund, the medical expense account, and even a small inheritance he'd received from his brother years earlier. Conservative estimates put the total at over $120,000 in the past year alone. This is textbook financial elder abuse, Michael's colleague whispered to him, though I overheard. Even between spouses, this crosses legal lines. When Michael stepped away to make some calls, I noticed Dad staring at the papers spread across the table, a lifetime of financial security, now reduced to evidence of betrayal. What do you want to do, Dad? I asked gently. He looked up at me, his eyes clear despite the medication that usually clouded them. I want to protect what's left. For my care, for your sister's future, for your Grand Canyon trip. He took a shaky breath. And I want the truth from your mother. No more lies. Michael returned his expression, grim but determined. I've spoken with the elder law specialist. Given the circumstances and your father's condition, we can file for emergency power of attorney and financial guardianship. It would freeze the accounts immediately and transfer control to a court-appointed guardian, which could be you, Christy, if that's what your father wants. Dad nodded slowly. And what about the rest of it? The money that's gone? There are legal remedies for financial recovery, but that would mean pressing charges, Michael explained gently. It would be a longer process. I looked at my father, this man who had never raised his voice in anger, who had taught me that integrity mattered above all else. It's your decision, Dad. Whatever you choose, I'll support you. He straightened in his chair, summoning dignity, despite his frail frame. Let's start with the power of attorney. I need to know whatever's left is safe. I nodded to Michael, who stepped into the hallway to make the call that would set everything in motion. Call the lawyer. Now. Within 5 minutes of Michael placing that call, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Mom must have overheard or somehow sensed what was happening. Her calls came one after another, followed by texts pleading for me to stop this madness and think about the family. Then other names started appearing on my screen. Cousins, family, friends, even my mother's pastor. She had launched a full-scale campaign to pressure me into backing down. Most disturbing were the calls from my sister Heather, who clearly hadn't been told the whole story. "Christy, what the hell?" she demanded when I finally answered. Mom's hysterical, saying you're trying to take control of all their money and accusing her of theft. What are you doing? I took a deep breath and walked her through everything. The Hawaii trip, the drained accounts, Dad's anniversary savings. The line went silent for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Heather, I'm here," she said, her voice small. I can't believe Mom would do this. Are you sure?" "Come see the bank statements yourself," I offered. "Talk to Dad." An hour later, Heather arrived, her face pale and drawn. She hugged Dad tightly, then reviewed the evidence with growing horror. When Mom tried to pull her aside, claiming I was manipulating everyone, Heather stood her ground. "I need to see this for myself, Mom," she said firmly. It was perhaps the first time I'd ever seen my sister stand up to our mother. The temporary emergency hearing was scheduled for the following morning. As evening fell, the house divided into armed camps. Michael and I helping Dad prepare his statement for the judge, Mom and Aunt Patricia making frantic calls to family members who might influence the situation. As I was helping Dad to bed, he suddenly clutched my arm, his face contorted in pain. "Christy," he gasped, "can't breathe right." I called for Michael, who was already dialing 911. Dad's color was all wrong, grayish with a blue tinge to his lips. The cancer had metastasized to his lungs weeks earlier, but this was different. This was crisis. The paramedics arrived within minutes, filling the bedroom with efficient movement and medical terminology. Mom hovered in the doorway, her anger temporarily replaced by genuine fear. For the ride to the hospital, all hostilities were suspended as we focused on the one thing we all still shared: love for the man now fighting for each breath. In the emergency room, a doctor pulled me aside while they stabilized Dad. "The stress has exacerbated his condition," she explained gently. "His body is already compromised from the cancer and treatments. This kind of emotional trauma can have very real physical effects." The implication was clear: the confrontation might have accelerated his decline. I sat in the waiting room, my head in my hands, wondering if my pursuit of justice had cost precious days with my father. Michael sat beside me, a steady presence, while Mom and Aunt Patricia whispered together across the room. Heather paced between us, belonging to neither camp, her loyalties visibly torn. "I was just trying to protect him," I said to Michael, my voice breaking. "You are protecting him," he assured me. "Christy, your mother's actions were hurting him long before you discovered them. This was going to come to a head eventually." The doctor returned with cautious good news. Dad was stabilized and being moved to a room. His condition was serious, but not immediately life-threatening. When I was finally allowed to see him, the sight of him connected to oxygen and monitors shattered something inside me. I took his hand, careful of the IV line. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I never meant for this to happen." His eyes fluttered open. "Not your fault," he whispered through the oxygen mask. "Needed to know." A nurse appeared at my shoulder. "He needs rest now. You can come back in the morning." As I left the hospital that night, the weight of everything crashed down on me. In the parking lot, I finally broke, sobs tearing from my chest as Michael held me against the cold metal of our car. The strain of working myself to exhaustion, discovering the betrayal, confronting my mother, and now possibly losing my father sooner than expected. It was too much. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing anymore," I admitted through tears. "What if fighting this is taking away his last days?" Michael held my face between his hands. "Listen to me. Your father asked for this. He wants to protect what's his, not just for himself, but for you and Heather. He's lived his life with integrity, and he deserves to have that respected, especially now." He wiped away my tears with his thumbs. We'll find a way through this that honors his wishes without adding more stress. I promise. I nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. Tomorrow would bring the emergency hearing more hospital visits and difficult conversations. But tonight, in a cold hospital parking lot, I made a new promise to myself and to my father. I would find a way to fulfill his final wish, no matter what obstacles my own mother placed in our path. The emergency court hearing took place in a small, wood-paneled room that smelled of furniture polish and old paper. Dad couldn't attend due to his hospitalization, but his signed affidavit and the doctor's statement about his condition were enough for the proceedings to continue. I sat beside Michael and his elder law colleague, hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop their trembling. Across the aisle, Mom and Aunt Patricia huddled with a hastily retained attorney who kept whispering urgently in my mother's ear. Heather had chosen to sit directly behind me after reviewing the financial documents in detail the previous evening. This isn't about taking sides, she'd told me. This is about what's right for Dad. The judge, an older woman, with silver-rimmed glasses and a no-nonsense demeanor, reviewed the evidence efficiently. Bank statements, withdrawal records, the Hawaii vacation receipts, Dad's medical records, his notarized statement requesting financial protection. Mrs. Wilson. The judge addressed my mother directly. These records show systematic withdrawal of substantial funds from accounts belonging wholly or partly to your husband during a period when he was medically incapacitated. How do you explain these transactions? Mom's attorney leaned forward. Your Honor, my client has been married to Richard Wilson for 42 years. As his spouse, she has managed their finances throughout their marriage and has always acted in the family's best interest. That doesn't answer my question, the judge replied evenly. I'm asking about specific withdrawals totaling over $120,000 in the past year, during which time Mr. Wilson has been battling terminal cancer. Mom stood ignoring her attorney's attempt to keep her seated. Those funds went to family expenses and medical costs, not covered by insurance, she declared, her voice quavering slightly. Richard has always trusted me with our finances, including $27,000 for a Hawaiian vacation 3 days ago. The judge held up the printed screenshots I had provided. While your husband was receiving palliative care, and your son was trying to fulfill your husband's dying wish to see the Grand Canyon, the room fell silent. Mom's face flushed deep red, then drained of all color. Her attorney whispered something urgently, but she shook her head. I needed a break, she said finally. Anyone who's been a caregiver would understand. The judge's expression remained impassive. Mrs. Wilson, the court is sympathetic to the difficulties of caring for a seriously ill spouse. However, that does not extend to the appropriation of funds specifically designated for the ill spouse's care and personal wishes, particularly in amounts this substantial. After reviewing the remaining evidence, the judge ruled in Dad's favor, granting temporary financial guardianship to me, with oversight from the court-appointed Elder Services representative. All accounts would be frozen, then restructured to ensure Dad's remaining assets were protected and used for his care and wishes. As we left the courtroom, Mom created a scene in the hallway, her voice echoing off the marble floors. How could you do this to your own mother, after everything I've sacrificed for this family? I kept walking Michael's hand steady at the small of my back until her next words stopped me cold. Richard put me through hell with his neediness. 42 years of putting everyone else first, and the one time I do something for myself, you drag me to court. I turned slowly. Dad gave you everything, Mom. Everything. And when he needed you most, you took his savings and went to Hawaii. My voice was deadly calm. This isn't about punishing you. It's about protecting him in the time he has left. At the hospital later that day, I sat with Dad and explained the court's decision. Relief washed over his face. Thank you, son, he said weakly. Didn't want to believe it had come to this, but thank you. With the legal matters temporarily resolved, I refocused on Dad's Grand Canyon wish. The doctors were concerned about his ability to travel, but after consulting with a medical transport service, we developed a plan that would minimize risks while making the journey possible. Michael used his legal connections to expedite everything: special accommodations, medical clearances, transportation arrangements. I liquidated some investments to cover costs, that would have been paid from Dad's now protected accounts. Through it all, Mom maintained her position as the victim in the situation. She moved in with Aunt Patricia, sending daily texts alternating between guilt trips. "Your father is asking for me, but I suppose you'll keep us apart now," and attempts at reconciliation without accountability. We all make mistakes. "Christy, it's time to put this behind us." I maintained firm boundaries, allowing her hospital visits only when I or Heather could be present. Dad never asked us to exclude her. Despite everything, he still loved the woman he'd spent his life with, but the easy affection between them was gone, replaced by a strained politeness that was painful to witness. Heather struggled the most with the new family dynamic. Having always been closer to Mom, she now found herself questioning everything. "Did you always feel like Mom favored me?" she asked one evening as we shared coffee in the hospital cafeteria. "It wasn't your fault," I assured her. "And Dad and I had our own special bond. It balanced out." She shook her head. "But I never saw it. All these years I just accepted the narrative that I was the good child and you were the difficult one." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry, Christy. I should have seen it sooner." 2 weeks after the court hearing, Dad was strong enough to make the journey. The medical transport team was exceptional, monitoring him constantly as we flew to Arizona. Michael had arranged for a specialized van that could accommodate Dad's oxygen tank and reclining needs for the drive to the Grand Canyon. We arrived at the South Rim just before sunset. The medical team helped settle Dad into a wheelchair, equipped with oxygen, positioning him at the perfect viewpoint. Michael, Heather, and I stood slightly behind, allowing him this moment that belonged to him alone. The sun began its descent, painting the ancient rock formations in impossible shades of gold, amber, and crimson. The vastness of the canyon stretched before us, a testament to time and nature's patient artistry. Dad's face, so often tight with pain in recent months, relaxed into an expression of pure wonder. "Worth the wait," he whispered, reaching back to find my hand without taking his eyes from the view. "Thank you, son." We stayed until the stars emerged, the canyon disappearing into shadow as the night sky revealed its own majesty. Dad insisted on remaining despite the dropping temperature, wrapped in blankets, his eyes drinking in every moment. Later, in our adjoining hotel rooms specially equipped for his medical needs, Dad called me to his bedside. "This was everything I hoped for," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I wanted to feel small against something so ancient and magnificent. Puts life in perspective." He paused, his next words careful and deliberate. "I want you to know something, Christy. You are the best of me. Whatever happens with your mother with the legal proceedings, remember that. You stood for what was right even when it was hard." We spent 3 precious days at the Grand Canyon. Dad rallied in a way none of the doctors had predicted, finding energy to visit multiple viewpoints and even sit through a ranger's geology talk that fascinated him. It was as if, having fulfilled his final wish, he'd found peace that temporarily transcended his physical limitations. On the 4th morning, I woke to find Dad already awake, watching the sunrise from his window. "Beautiful day," he commented. They were the last words he spoke to me. That evening, as the sun set once again over the canyon, my father closed his eyes for the final time, his hand in mine, his face peaceful. The doctor said it was remarkable he'd held on long enough to complete the journey. "Sometimes people wait for a specific moment or accomplishment," she explained gently. "Your father got his wish." We brought Dad's body back to Boston, and the funeral arrangements began. Mom insisted on taking charge, portraying herself as the grieving widow, while carefully avoiding any mention of our estrangement or the ongoing legal proceedings regarding the misappropriated funds. Aunt Patricia attempted reconciliation at the funeral home, pulling me aside with tearful apologies. "I never meant for things to go this far," she claimed. "I just wanted to give your mother some happiness during a difficult time. By spending Dad's money meant for his care and his wishes," I replied quietly. "You both made your choices. Now we all live with the consequences." The funeral was well attended. Dad had been loved by many. Colleagues from his engineering days, neighbors, friends from various phases of his life. They shared stories of his kindness, his integrity, his quiet humor. It was a portrait of a life well lived, a man who had touched others not through grand gestures but through consistent decency. Mom played her role perfectly, accepting condolences with dignified grief. Most attendees had no idea of the fractured reality beneath the surface. Only those closest to us, Michael's parents, a few of Dad's oldest friends who had contributed to the medical fund, knew the truth, and they formed a protective circle around me throughout the day. In the months that followed, the legal proceedings regarding the misappropriated funds continued. The court ordered repayment of a significant portion, resulting in the sale of my mother's car and some jewelry, along with a payment plan that would extend for years. The family home, which had been in Dad's name, was transferred to a trust benefiting Heather and me, with provisions for Mom's housing needs. The extended family divided along predictable lines. Those who received Mom's version of events, that I had cruelly seized control during a time of grief, kept their distance. Others who knew Dad well enough to question the narrative, or who had seen the evidence themselves, offered quiet support. Christmas was particularly difficult. For the first time in my life, there was no gathering at the family home, no Dad carving the turkey while wearing the ridiculous Santa hat. Mom always pretended to hate, but secretly bought for him each year when the old one wore out. Instead, Michael and I hosted a small dinner for Heather and a few close friends, creating new traditions while honoring Dad's memory. Mom sent gifts that remained unopened under the tree until well into January, when I finally found the emotional strength to unwrap them. Impersonal gift cards and a photo album of family pictures that strategically excluded Michael from most frames. The path forward wasn't clear, but it was mine to determine. I had protected my father's wishes and dignity in his final days. I had stood for truth, even when it meant being cast as the villain in my mother's story. And though the cost had been high, I had learned something profound about the nature of family love and integrity that would guide me through whatever came next. 1 year after Dad's passing, I stood at his favorite spot in Boston Harbor, watching fishing boats returning with their day's catch. It was a clear September afternoon, the kind of perfect New England day that Dad would have called a gift from the universe. Michael stood beside me, his hand warm in mine, solid and present as always. We'd scattered some of Dad's ashes here months earlier in a private ceremony, just Michael, Heather, and me. Mom had been invited but declined, sending a message through Heather that she couldn't bear it. The legal proceedings had finally concluded 3 months ago. The court had ordered restitution of $48,000, far less than what had been taken, but enough to close that chapter. Mom had sold her jewelry and accepted a personal loan from Aunt Patricia to make the initial payment, with a structured plan for the remainder. The medical expense fund contributors had been quietly informed about the misappropriation. Most had been understanding, focusing on the fact that Dad had gotten his Grand Canyon wish in the end, rather than on the betrayal that had nearly prevented it. My relationship with Mom remained complicated. We had spoken only a handful of times, mostly regarding legal matters. Her attempts at reconciliation followed a predictable pattern. Initial apologies followed quickly by justifications and subtle blame shifting. If you had been more understanding of my stress, if you hadn't involved lawyers, if you could just let the past be the past. I had learned through months of therapy that her version of reconciliation required my complicity in forgetting the betrayal rather than addressing it. It required me to once again become the accommodating son who accepted whatever scraps of affection she offered. I couldn't do that anymore, not for myself and not for Dad's memory. Christmas had been the breaking point for many extended family members. Mom had hosted her traditional gathering, expecting everyone to attend as if nothing had changed. When Heather and I declined, choosing instead to spend the holiday with Michael's family, the battle lines were clearly drawn. Cousins, aunts, and uncles had to choose sides, and many chose the easier path of accepting Mom's narrative rather than confronting the uncomfortable truth. Heather had struggled the most with navigating the new family landscape. Having been the favored child for so long, she found herself suddenly experiencing the conditional love I had always known. When she supported my decisions or spent time with Michael and me, Mom would become cold and distant with her. It was an eye-opening experience for my sister. I never realized how manipulative she could be. Heather had confessed one evening. It's like she only loves us when we're exactly who she wants us to be. Despite the family fractures, there had been healing too. 6 months after Dad's death, I had started a support group for adult children dealing with parental financial abuse. The stories I heard there helped me understand that what had happened in our family was sadly not uncommon, though the circumstances varied. Parents who drained college funds meant for grandchildren, siblings who took advantage of elderly parents, spouses who hid assets during times of illness. The group had grown into a small community, meeting monthly in a church basement, sharing resources and strategies for protection and recovery. It had become an unexpected source of purpose and healing for me, transforming my pain into something that could help others. Michael's law firm had also begun taking on more elder abuse cases, often pro bono, after seeing firsthand how difficult the legal system could be to navigate during such emotionally charged situations. "Your dad would be proud of this," Michael told me one night after a particularly difficult but successful case. "You're protecting people who can't protect themselves." That was his whole thing, wasn't it? Integrity and standing up for what's right. We had established a small foundation in Dad's name that provided grants for terminal cancer patients to fulfill final wishes. It wasn't large, funded primarily by the restitution money and donations from Dad's former colleagues, but it had already helped 4 families experience meaningful final memories together. As I stood at the harbor on that anniversary, I reflected on the lessons of the past year, painful but necessary truths that had reshaped my understanding of family love and self-worth. I had learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. I could release my anger toward my mother without allowing her back into a position where she could cause more harm. Forgiveness was for my peace, not her comfort. I had learned that family is defined by actions rather than blood. Michael's unwavering support throughout the crisis had demonstrated true family bonds. The friends who had stood by us, the support group members who understood without judgment, my sister's growing ability to see beyond the family mythology, these connections were stronger than the ones that had broken. Most importantly, I had learned to trust my own perception of reality. Years of subtle gaslighting had trained me to question my feelings, to accept treatment that diminished me, to believe I was too sensitive or making things bigger than they needed to be. Standing firm against that manipulation had been terrifying but ultimately liberating. "Penny for your thoughts," Michael said, bringing me back to the present moment. "Just thinking about Dad," I replied. "About how he would say that pain either makes you bitter or better. Your choice." Michael smiled. "And which did you choose?" I considered the question seriously. "Both at different times, but I'm working toward better." The foundation was growing. The support group was helping others. Heather and I had a stronger relationship than ever before. Michael and I were discussing adoption, beginning the process of building our own family based on the values we shared. There was still pain, still anger that surfaced unexpectedly. There were days when a simple sight or sound, fishing boats like the ones Dad loved, the smell of the motor oil he used in his workshop, the classical music he played while working, would bring tears without warning. Grief doesn't follow a linear path. It circles back when least expected. But there was also a newfound strength, a certainty about my own boundaries and values that couldn't be shaken by others' disapproval or manipulation. Dad had lived his principles quietly but firmly. In standing up for him when he could no longer stand for himself, I had found my own version of that strength. As the sun began to set over the harbor, painting the water in colors reminiscent of the Grand Canyon's magnificent walls, I felt Dad's presence more strongly than I had in months. Not in any supernatural sense, but in the values he had instilled in me, the lessons he had taught by example rather than words. "I think he would have liked the foundation," I said to Michael as we turned to leave. "Helping other families make those final memories together." "He would have loved it," Michael agreed. "But he would have been even prouder of you, the man you've become through all of this." Walking back to our car, I thought about the long journey from that moment of discovery, a social media tag revealing a devastating betrayal, to now. The hardest path is rarely the easiest one, but it's often the one that leads to the most growth. If you're watching this and dealing with your own family betrayals or difficult truths, remember that standing up for what's right doesn't make you the villain, even if others try to cast you in that role. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries and hold people accountable. Sometimes healing means letting go of the relationship you wished you had and accepting the reality of what is. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping the peace and standing for truth? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories that remind us we're not alone in our struggles. Thank you for listening, and remember, integrity might cost you relationships, but it saves your soul.